Hi, this video is a recording of what we would have said if myself and Doug Hall and Phil Pearce had actually done a conventional presentation at the London Measurecamp unconference in September 2012. What we'd done was we'd solicited a whole load of tips from people via a form, and this screen shows some of the things that we had coming up. Quick tips on profiles and filters, custom variable ideas, custom tracking ideas, and so on, including an item there called extreme custom tracking. And what we did was we put up this slide which lists all the titles of the different tips that we had received via the form, and then our intention was to get people to vote on them and shout out for the ones that we wanted to talk about. But in fact, the Measurecamp is an unconference, so it's a very unstructured event, and what happened was we didn't talk about very many of these at all. We talked about lots of other things instead. So it seemed a shame not to share these with people, and also a shame, disrespectful to the people who had taken the trouble to submit them, not to have them up online somewhere, have them available. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to run through some of these and just quickly list them out so that we can share. So the first group were quick tips and profiles on profiles and filters. One of them that we started, we did cover this actually, which was Doug Hall did an item which he actually demoed about how to calibrate GA, and I wish I could link to a summary version of this because this is something actually demoed on the occasion. But basically the gist of this was to hack your user agent in such a way that basically you could use the site, explore it fully, and then quite easily be able to segment out or filter out the visits that you were doing that you were using at the time. I'm getting all tongue-tied again, but anyway, basically filter and segment so that you could see exactly just your own visits as you're crawling the site, exploring it, and checking exactly what happens, what information is sent through. I hope I can find somewhere a link to add to that and stick up online so that you can understand it better. Anyway, moving on, there was a quick one from me, which is the usual point about always having a profile, a raw profile, which is unfiltered, and also make sure that you have a spare admin login to against the time that somebody finally manages to lose the relevant password or whatever it is, because believe me, everyone says that we do all this, and time again I discover that people haven't done it, so just go and do it. Here's the next item, third on the list, a really interesting idea from Peter O'Neill, the organiser of the Measurecamp. I've put a link there into his blog article which is explaining this, which is about basically putting your keywords into buckets so that you, instead of having a whole load to deal with, you filter them down so that you group them in ways that make sense so that you can compare groups of campaigns and groups of keywords against each other. That makes things an awful lot more practical. You'd be doing this in a specialized filter, not in your main working specialized profile, not in your main working profiles, of course. But very handy tip. In fact, if we skip past my quick item there, which is about for your working profiles, it's a very good idea to have data hygiene filters which force the URI into lowercase. There's a point there I was going to make about fixing the default page using the profile setting in Google Analytics is a bit risky, because basically whatever you put in there, it's going to append on to any URIs which just end in the slash. So it's actually probably better to use a regular expression search and replace filter to search on what the versions of your home page that you want to replace and sort of make canonical, and do it that way rather than relying on the setting in the profile configuration, which can be a bit of an overkill. And then there was another point that I had at the bottom there, which was about, it's a variation on Peter's technique of using filters to break your keywords down into groups. I've also, in some profiles, I do a similar thing with the actual URIs. I take all the category pages, all the subcategory pages, and all the product pages and rewrite those into sort of generic page groups of this kind. I use a very obvious camel case URI, so it's quite clear that something funny has been done. That type of technique is probably in the future going to become less useful than it is at the moment, but for the time being that actually can help a great deal with navigation studies of one kind or another. For example, I find that one of my favourite reports, which is the reverse goal path for how is it that people came to finally add an item to the cart, for example, I find that this type of approach where you're grouping pages together like that can be actually quite useful. Anyway, moving on. This was an item there about filtering out bots by ISP, which we did discuss. That's actually a very, very useful technique. Both Phil Pierce and I both are strongly in favour of that, and Phil has come up with a wonderful regular expression which catches even more of them than the one that I've got up there on the screen. Basically, it's one thing if you've got your own site monitoring company looking at your site, they've probably provided you with a list of IP numbers which you can filter out to eliminate their traffic. But what's happening increasingly is that loads and loads of different bots of one kind or another are crawling all over your site, and you don't have a hope in hell of working out what the IP numbers are of them. So what I've discovered, and Phil's discovered, and others have as well, is that quite often you can spot these in strange patterns of usage and associate them with specific ISP organizations, and then use that as the dimension which you use to filter them out. Of course, there is a risk that some of these are sort of just hosting companies and you might accidentally also eliminate some bona fide traffic, but it's probably worth having a look at this and considering it. And I mentioned in the presentation the example of a client I'd been working for who had acquired a fairly low volume site and had discovered that their PPC conversion rates for this new site were noticeably different from what they were anticipating and expecting from elsewhere. And in the end, what this came down to was the fact that there were so many bots crawling all over the thing that it was actually having a detectable effect upon their conversion rates and making them feel rather unhappy about it. So this is a technique that's well worth having a look at. Next up is an item that we'd got from the floor. Somebody did shout out one. This goes from Russ McCarthy, who pointed out something I certainly didn't know, and it's dead handy for people like me, and I dare say many people listening who have to work with several GA accounts. And you have the issue that if you're signed into one of them, then you have to sign out to switch over to the other, or do what I used to do, which was to run a different browser. So I'd have one lot open in Chrome, another open in Firefox, and so on. Actually, as Russ pointed out, you could do it all in Chrome. There's a handy setting over there. If you go and have a look at the top right, click down into your settings in Chrome, there's signed in as one of the options. If you have a look in there, you'll discover you can sign in as more than one person at a time. Dead handy, well worth a look. That's very useful. I've added onto this list something that we didn't have yesterday, which is Phil's two massive shared spreadsheets, one of which is a big list of filters and regular expressions, which includes the one for filtering out the ISP, and the other item that he shared with us all is an Excel sheet full of auto setup information for sorting out GA profiles. So those are two handy resources that are well worth a look. Moving on, well, now some quick tips on dashboards and reports. One of the things that I like doing in dashboards to get a visual comparison between the behavior of different groups of shall we say visitors or pages or whatever it may be, is to use multiple versions of the same widget and then use the filtering function within the widget so that each one shows different things, different groups of whatever it is. That kind of thing works. The other thing I find handy is I'm very much into the idea of building sort of task-based dashboards, you know, a dashboard for whoever is running email, a dashboard for whoever is running some other type of campaign or interested in some other area of the site. I like using those in combination with custom reports. I also favour building custom reports task-based which just show all the different things that you need to fulfill that task, often filtered down so it's only showing a subset of visitors. And the nice way for combining the two together is to use the links from the widgets to the custom dashboards, and that works. I find that works quite well as a nice interface trick. You're effectively building a completely alternative navigation route. A thing that I've chucked in, another one, quick one from me, is I'm a great fan of an obscure, often overlooked report called the Reverse Goal Path Report. And the trick with this one is this report is very, very good if you're working with the type of goal where you have no idea what the likely route is to that goal, so you can't configure a funnel report, and where the route to it might be particularly interesting. A classic example would be something like setting up a goal for the 404 page. So in that instance, it would be very handy to know how it is that people are getting there. And similarly, you could do something similar with the add to basket, add to cart. That's quite useful. And the nice thing about this type of thing, as compared to, say, the goal flow visualizations, super though those are, is that this gives you a nice exportable table view. So you've got the different paths, or the top 10 paths or top 25 or whatever it is, in a table that you can export, which I find quite useful. Another quick tip, which is something that has been happening more and more of late, is to keep an eye on conversion rates by browser version, because ever since, let me think, well, Chrome has always done auto updates. I think Firefox does now, and doesn't Internet Explorer. Anyway, what I've seen happening is that whichever vendor it is bungs out an auto update, and suddenly, if you know what you're looking for, you will discover that the conversion rates for whatever it is, or that basically there may be issues with that particular update, and you've got a sort of sudden drop off that you wouldn't notice, or more to the point, a whole load of your visitors are having a really bad time on the site. What usually happens is it disappears because the vendor spots whatever it is that's causing issues elsewhere, no doubt as well, and fixes it. But during that interim period, there can be some nasty stuff going on. And there are two, obviously you aren't necessarily going to rebuild the site to suit, but there are two solutions that come to mind. One is at least make sure that all your customer support people are aware of the issue and do know to ask, are you using Chrome? Perhaps you should try switching to another browser. There's a short-term incident issue that we're working on. You could, if you wanted to do something more elaborate, have something that's basically looking at the user agent and popping up a warning if somebody arrives on the site using whatever it is, and advising them that there is an issue that you're working on. But for the time being, please consider switching to a different browser. Not that people ever like hearing that, or being recommended to do that. Onwards, what have we got next? Yes, from James Gurd, James at Digital Juggler, the e-commerce advisor and consultant. Annotations. Yes. How few of us use annotations? If only we did more often, just to add those very handy notes to share with the team, or to share with yourself 6 months later why it was that something happened. I must admit, I look forward to the day when we can do two things with annotations. One is export them in some way, get at them with the API so we can include them in our nice reports that we are using other tools to create. And also, even better, it would be really handy if we could configure them in advance, so that when you're planning something new, you could put an annotation in advance saying new campaign is going to launch next week, and so the annotation's already there and waiting. Or even perhaps actually be able to create them via the API would be rather nice, a management API to allow the creation of annotations. Who knows? One of the other things is always keep an eye on the latest interface tweaks. Two that have appeared in the last month, which are terribly nice, are the shortcuts, which allow you to shortcut not just to a report, but to a tweaked, configured, and dialed in and fettled the way you want it version of the report. And the other one that I really appreciate is, at long last, we have in the compared to previous period drop down on the calendar, we now have compared to previous year, which is something that I need to do all the time. It would be even nicer if such a thing could include a little bit of intelligence, so that if you selected entire weeks for your comparison, it would adjust to provide suitably matching complete weeks. because again, if you're in a type of site which has strong patterns of behavior during the week, you really do need to be comparing Sundays with Sundays and Mondays with Mondays. Moving on, we have here a list of actually only 2 places, gacrowd.com and customreportsharing.com, for the sharing of resources. As you're probably aware, dashboards, custom reports and advanced segments are sort of shareable, so share them. Very, very valuable resources if we all contribute. I must admit I haven't contributed many, but I have contributed a few to customreportsharing.com. Moving on, we solicited some custom variable ideas. What are people using custom variables for? Here's an obvious one, which more and more people ought to be doing, I think, is differentiating between logged in and not logged in users. And an interesting point relevant to that is if you check, it would appear that the GA terms of service have changed during the last few months. I think this change happened round about the time that they started rolling out remarketing. But it used to forbid the storing of any form of identification number which could be used to link to offline identities, if you see what I mean. If you stored a unique reference number which in your offline systems you could match to a person, that was technically forbidden. It was a daft condition because in fact they also encouraged you to store the e-commerce transaction number in GA, which in 99% of cases I suspect could be used to do exactly what they were forbidding elsewhere. Anyway, that's now changed. It's now changed so that it's actually just saying that you mustn't store an ID which Google might be able to use to identify a person. If it's a random ID number which makes sense only in your back-end system, then it would now appear to be okay. So that strikes me lends itself to further wishes to encourage people to actually log in, and there is a practical benefit these days for visitors to your site to do so. If you can, for example, say log in and we will make your shopping cart or your other settings or preferences synchronized across your various devices, so that I can see that we might move towards a world quite quickly in which, whereas now when you land on an e-commerce site or any type of site and it says log in first, you think, why on earth would I? I can think we might, within the space of about a year, less probably, be in an environment in which people are actually saying, oh, I think I will, because they want the convenience of it, the information, whatever they do, being able to be continued by them when they switch devices later on in the day. At which point, being able to use custom variables to track people in an anonymous sort of way, but to link those sessions up, becomes not only desirable, but might actually become practical. Here's another tip that I have, is whenever you, your clients, whatever, anyone is in talks with a vendor who is supplying anything like a behavioral targeting system or a multivariate testing system, do remember to ask the default question is, you do track this in GA, don't you? Some of them say yes, some of them say no, we've got a wonderful interface ourselves, it's much better, yada yada yada. Obviously, all I'm saying is do ask the question. It makes tons of sense to make sure that there is at least some vestige of indication of what was going on stored in GA as well as their own system. And some of them are very good about this. People like Visual Website Optimizer have a nice integration. Some of the survey people like Kissmetrics do it, I know. But some don't. Some do a very much a sort of not invented here thing and say that their system's better and adequate and better for everything. So I'd say always remember, whenever you're in those discussions, to specify. Talking of custom variable ideas, Matt Clark at TechPad has a wonderful, great list of them, and there's the link to it there. Matt wasn't actually present, but he's contributed a huge amount of stuff to this conference presentation. Thank you, Matt. Onwards. Interesting idea from Jerry White here. Use custom variables for attribution. Yes, we can all try and rely on the built-in facilities for attribution, but there may be things that you want to know about, things that you might consider as sort of almost attribution type information that you would like to store, and maybe possibly you might want to use a there's some debate. I'm trying to think whether you'd use a session-based one for this, or I think we're probably thinking here more of a visitor-based one. But to store that kind of information so that you know other factors that may have contributed to a conversion. It might be something like looking at the About Us page or looking up certain types of information about you, which you might want to store as almost like a contribution towards an ultimate conversion. This was a very interesting one from Michael Hayes at 360 Thinking, which was suggesting using custom variable ideas to track the content. Using custom variables to track the contents of items added to a cart which are not subsequently ultimately bought. And Matt Clark at TechPad also has I think a blog post somewhere on his site about a variation on that, which is using events to store information about such items, and in particular the value, so that you get a better idea of the value associated with abandoned carts. Pushing on, and as I push on I realise there's no way we could have got any of these into half an hour, got all of these into half an hour or 25 minutes as it actually turned out to be. Matt Clark again, here we are in custom tracking ideas. Yeah, GA basically does present you with browser information, but not all of it. In their attempts, they're trying to produce helpful information, so you've got operating system, the browser, and the version, but you haven't got as much as is actually in the user agent string, so you might want to, in certain circumstances, consider tracking that in full detail. And there's a post about it there with the link. There's another thing from Matt, which is on your product page, if it's showing whether an item is in stock or not, it might be worthwhile tracking when people are looking at items which are actually displaying as not in stock, so that you can judge the impact of that and see whether in fact you can, for example, off the top of my head, associate people looking with items which turn out not to be in stock with subsequent rapid exits from the site, as in they get annoyed by this and frustrated and leave. You might even in that situation consider, would it be better not to show the item at all if it's not in stock? Debatable, very debatable. So if you track it, you can measure it and work it out. Another item from Matt, which is, maybe we should have put this into the extreme tracking section. Tracking profit, margin, discounts, all that type of stuff by sending the information to GA. Now what we're talking about there, what Matt's talking about, is not sticking it into the ordinary e-commerce transaction information or ordinary GA tracking information, as far as I can make out, of the type that is horribly, horribly visible if somebody knows what they're looking for. I don't think many companies would be keen to signal their profit margins or cost of items in ways that might be read by all and sundry with minimal attempts to wouldn't require much to spot it. I think he's possibly there suggesting actually sending the tracking calls directly to GA using server-side tracking, not browser, not client-side tracking, so that the two bits of information can be joined up, but they're not actually visible to the person doing the browsing. Here's a simple custom tracking idea from me, which is track error messages. It's a very simple idea, but it's very, very rarely done, and I can bore for Britain on the subject of why I think this is such a good idea. But the short version is, if you want to improve your user experience or visitor experience on your site, the most obvious way to starting point of this is find out where they're having trouble. Find out where you're basically slapping people in the face and giving them error messages that tell them they've done something wrong. Track them, measure them, work out which are the ones you don't expect, which are the ones that you can do something about. I really do recommend that extremely highly. And as a variation on it, I also recommend actually configuring at least some of them as error messages. I've written about this on my blog. One of the good examples there is a 404 page as an error message, because the nice thing about this, configure that as a goal, and then you configure configure GA to send you a custom alert when the conversion rate goes up. Now those alerts go out too late in the UK to be much use to tell you you've got a broken link. I'd hope maybe you'd spot it before then. But what they're handy for is there's the report which attempts to attribute the likely causes of this change. And what you may well find is a quick look at that does some of the sort of research that you could do manually, but signals to you that the reason for the increase in the 404s was referral traffic, and the referral traffic was coming with this referral path. So in one quick look at that report, and you know where to go and try and post the explanation of what the correct link was, or whatever it is, try and fix it. Quite often you'll find it's an absolute firestorm raging on some voucher code site where they're all busy saying, yeah, that it doesn't work, they've taken the offer away because it was too good to be true, and generally dissing your company. So you can jump in there and either provide a link that does work or just calm everyone down and explain what's been going on. Onwards. Use events for tracking on-site promotions and campaigns. Yes, do that. Don't use campaign tags. If you start campaign tagging internal stuff, internal campaigns, you are going to mess up your data retreat, especially in this age of multi-channel funnel reporting. Don't do it. Don't do it. Use events. Use anything else rather than internal. Rather than using campaign tags on internal campaigns. Andrew Hood from Linchpin came up with a very, very, very good idea for anyone who isn't using e-commerce tracking, anybody who isn't an e-commerce site. Make use of all the e-commerce tracking to track something that is relevant to your site. It's there for the asking. There's loads of reports that work with it. What Andrew's suggesting there is, for example, if it's a lead type site and you've got forms on the site where the leads are sort of filling in information about themselves, well, pass that information in using the e-commerce tracking, and then use it to assign values to these different kinds of leads, and away you go. You can really, really start doing some very interesting things with that approach. It's a very good idea indeed. Have a good think about that one. There's loads you could do. Here's Russ McCarthy again. Yes, the same thing really from these very closely related. Russ is talking about the idea of of pages. If it's a page, a landing page or a content page on your site which has got quite a lot of material on it, it can be very, very interesting to know how far people read down the page. I mean, a classic example for this would be a blog. As we all know, blog posts quite often have a very high bounce rate because somebody came, read the thing and went. It's actually a major success. It can be if you can work out that yes, they did read all the way down to the bottom of the page, or read most of it, and they didn't actually bounce at all. That was quite a long engagement. So that's a very good idea. Russ is referring to it there. I think Justin Catroni has written about it. There's lots of people there's material about that one online. Drew Foster from Linchpin has also come out with a similar vital point, which is all those sites where it's a single page and all manner of wonderful stuff happens within that page, but you have no idea what it is unless you put some custom tracking in. So very good point there. If you've got a site which is basically doing all manner of clever clog stuff within the one page, for heaven's sake, use virtual page views to break it down into different pages so that you are getting usable information out of it, some idea of what people are doing. I did actually use the word engagement just then, and there was a swear box in operation on the day of the unconference itself. That should have cost me £1. I did actually chip in £1 or two on the day during the presentation for other words, so I dare say I can bung them another £1 for that. Onwards. Michael Hayes 360 thinking, yes, testing tagging changes using Grease Monkey. That's an interesting idea. A bit like what Russ was on about earlier on, about actually trying to on the fly change things, hack things, and see the impact of that. Russ showed us something that's not, I don't think, mentioned anywhere on these slides. Well, maybe it is, we'll come to it. A system that he's built called Trackify, where you can basically, he's got a little bit of JavaScript bookmark. You click that, and then on the page that you're on, it offers you the option to add custom tracking to each of anything that you basically select, any of the links. So again, you can use that to customize the links so that your own visits can stand out like a sore thumb. Russ did a great demo where he got us all visiting the Conversion Works site, and he was looking at it. We showed the data on from Google real time on the screen, and we could see we had about whatever it was, 20-30 people from the presentation all hitting the site. That's another pound for the word hit, I suppose. And he then filtered it down using his Trackify system to so that his own visits to the site page requests had the an extra parameter stuffed onto the end of the URL, and we could see that he could use this system to filter out all the non-test traffic, with him being the equivalent of the tester. And I suppose Michael's talking here presumably about a variation of that, of using Grease Monkey to actually change the requests before they're sent out to the browser, so you could test adding sent out to the server, so you could test adding your own custom tracking and check what's is actually being passed through to GA. Need to think a bit more about that, but it seems interesting, an interesting idea to me. Onwards, right. There was a whole series of items here which I'm kind of glad we didn't get round to talking about. These were all from Matt Clark at Testpad, and I've put links in there. So what we're really talking about here is it being there's nothing to stop you using GA to store information which isn't really directly related to the site itself, not about what people are doing on the site, but stuff which is of a similar interest and similar sort of general topic, and which might be useful to have access to via the same interface, such as tracking returns when they're received by a direct mail company, an e-commerce company, or feeding information about complaints and customer service issues and so on. Very interesting thoughts. And again, the third item there is the idea that if you're doing this, you do need to figure out what kind of primary key you could also store for all these things to try and link them all together. It could indeed be the original order reference. That would be the obvious candidate in an e-commerce world, it seems to me, with some of those. There are links there, well worth having a look, because the stuff that Matt writes about on the TechBack site is astonishing and very, very well worth reading. Keep going on. Again, this is the idea. Now, this is getting more and more interesting. Is the idea of getting the data out of GA and using it with other forms of information. Matt's talking about a quite simple way of doing this, which is just to get the data as a one-off thing using the data feed query explorer, and then doing an analysis of products to see whether the Pareto principle applies, whether it's sort of 80% of your revenue is coming from 20% of the products that you sell, and so on, and then spotting anomalies where particular products or groups of products are behaving outside of the ordinary. I was encouraging people a lot yesterday on the day to go and have a look at the Google Analytics report automation magic script, because basically Nick from Google has made a script in Google Documents which very, very much simplifies the extraction of data from GA using the API. And then you use the script, install it in a Google Doc spreadsheet, suck the data out. And the other nice little trick that he shows in his blog post, the link to the blog post is there. The nice trick is to then take the charts from your spreadsheet, or spreadsheets plural, and then combine them all using a Google site to display all the information from perhaps separate sheets from separate sites from separate profiles, all in one particular document which can, to some extent, though I hesitate to say to how much, given my experience of Google Sites, can be made to look quite nice, but at least it assembles it all in one place. And the other great thing about the system that they've built using the Google Docs is, of course, the whole thing can be scheduled, so it pulls it all in the early hours of the morning each day, or once a month, or whatever is appropriate, or once an hour if you want. That's very, very well worth looking at. I do urge you all to have a look at that if you haven't already. Onwards, and I think concluding, I think this is our last slide, and we didn't talk much about this, and I should have put the links in here. Doug talked about a couple of I don't think, no, actually he didn't talk about it, but on his blog, on the Conversion Works blog, go on Google Conversion Works, find their blog, and you'll find that Doug has written quite a lot of stuff of late about content experiments, including reporting, showing some bugs and how to fix them, and also a very, very clever way of working with site-wide content, doing A/B tests on a whole load of stuff, such as changing all the headers or all the footers across a site, and doing tests of that kind. And I have seen, only this morning I was reading the Yahoo group and seeing somebody asking about this thing, and somebody had commented saying, no, it's not possible to test more than one page in GA content experiments. Go and check Doug's post, because it certainly is. And I think, yes, that's the last of the slides. So I don't know how long that took. It certainly wasn't 25 minutes, and I know I've been rushing through it here. Lots of interesting information there. There are links visible in most of this. We'll probably have the slides up online somewhere, and may even try and keep them up to date. But one other final tip on all this is watch out for the next Measurecamp, the next unconference. It was a brilliant event. I'm looking forward to the next one already. The sooner the better. I hope to see you there. Thanks.